There used to be a deal. It was a particularly American deal. The deal was, if you were willing to work, you could find a job. And not just any job, a job with pretty decent wages. And if you had a high school degree and any brains about you at all, and you were a good worker, you could even move up a little bit in your job. You could support your family, have a house, have a car, go on vacation from time to time, maybe even buy a boat. And above all, you could have some security. You weren't likely to be laid off, and if you were, you would receive a little help from the government for a month or two until the economy and production picked up back again, and you would get rehired. Many people worked their whole lives under this deal. It seemed like a reasonable deal. You gave your hard work, and in return, you and your family could live with dignity. And your children could have a good shot of having an even better life than you did. The deal seems to be fading, if not outright disappearing. Over the 1970s alone, so this is now, 35 years ago? Something like that? At least 32 million industrial jobs were eliminated in the U.S. This trend, starting in the 70s, has only escalated. Companies send labor overseas. Machines replace humans. And the jobs that are left are barely above minimum wage. And minimum wage, by the way, at 40 hours a week, puts a family of 4 into poverty. We've seen this right here at St. Stephen's. I'm not sure there's been a time since I've been here when everyone at St. Stephen's who's been of working age has had work. Our children and our grandchildren struggle to find work that would allow them to be the men and women that they want to be. It's hard to live with respect and the dignity that our baptismal covenant says is our right, says is everyone's right, when you cannot earn a living. Even families with work have both mom and dad working. Under the old deal, only one person had to be working. Now it's both mom and dad working, sometimes 2 jobs, in order to make ends meet. It's hard to live with respect and dignity when keeping food on your table consumes nearly all of your waking hours. The situation for our brothers and sisters at San Esteban is even tougher. The overall employment rate for all Latinos last year was between 10 and 12%, compared to 8% for the overall economy, almost half again as much. Plus, average weekly earnings for Latinos in 2011 was $571 versus $856 for whites. These numbers actually are likely to be optimistic because most Latinos in this country are working sort of under the table or informally. They face even greater odds of sudden layoff. And they came here only because this economic situation in Mexico is even worse. Their median household disposable income, the amount of money you have after you kind of paid your basic bills, is $5,000 a year, compared with $31,000 a year here. More than half of the Mexican population, more than half, live below the poverty line for Mexico. Ponder that. You can begin to understand why people might want to try to leave and have a better life, and many of them may have escaped the fire, but they've landed in a frying pan. And it's tempting for me personally, to engage in a little class warfare here, the class warfare that you hear about. Why are these big business owners, and who are they, who just blindly send work overseas and calmly put thousands of people out of work in the name of almighty profit. Who are these companies that get rich in Mexico while the vast majority of people are poor, if not outright starving? The richest man in the world is in Mexico, Carlos Slim. I have a bit of a radical streak in me, if you haven't picked up on that yet. And I feel this kind of unfairness, and I feel deep compassion for people who are suffering, and I kind of want to storm the gates, whatever they are. But that's probably a bit too simplistic. Many of these managers and business owners are perfectly good people. They're just trying to operate within a capitalist system that demands profits. They have to make hard and awful decisions, is another way of looking at it. And we're all tied together in these systems. They're what Walter Wink calls the powers that be. We talk about that, the powers that be that seem beyond all of us. Systems that are greater than us and leave us all with choices that don't seem to support the mutual fellowship and harmony that God promises us is part of the reign of God. And we don't know what to do. Today we hear Jesus call Herod a fox. The Pharisees have come to warn Jesus that Herod wants to kill him. And Jesus, with some seriously macho nonchalance, says, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work." He calls the most powerful man in the land, second only to the emperor of Rome, a fox. This is somebody who could arrest and execute Jesus without a trial, just get life and death authority over his people, and Jesus calls him a fox and says he's just going to keep on doing his work. No, foxes were actually common in Israel at the time. We don't have as many foxes out here, but I think people have all heard stories about foxes, the fantastic Mr. Fox and other stories like that. Foxes, though, in Israel were known as vicious killers who would rampage your chicken hutch or even attack your sheep. They would kill indiscriminately and then only eat what they needed. Jesus calling Herod a fox is a brave, vocal stand against injustice. He named Herod for what he is. Someone who just takes and kills and does whatever he needs to do to simply continue to be the head of the powers that be. What Jesus does is stand up to this power, resist this power, continue to denounce this power as a prophet, continue to work to heal those who are broken by the powers that be, continue to insist that the powers that be are not God. They are earthly powers that are not in line with God's desire for fellowship, harmony, and a dignified life for everyone. So Jesus does this, and it sends him to the cross. And he knows it. And he goes there to the cross out of love for the world and all who are in it. And as I looked at this gospel passage, I thought, well, there's some differences between now and then. We don't necessarily have these types of absolute dictators like Herod in quite as many places. They are still out there, but we don't live under one. Many of the people we know, even Mexico, with all of its problems, is not a dictatorship like Herod was. But there are still powerful people who exploit the powerless. And while I do think that our ability to point fingers and sort of be able to name the powers that be and say it's this person, like King Herod, that ability goes down a little bit nowadays, but the challenges actually have gone up because there's no one to point a finger at anymore. We all live in a system that locks all of us, rich and poor, into a competition. And it's one that favors a few winners, and it produces a lot of losers. It's even more insidious because the system does bring benefits to many people. I would have to say that compared to 2,000 years ago, more people are better off than they were then. It's not all bad. And the people in it, as much as I would like to storm the gates, are not all bad. And many of us even benefit from this system. But we seem to get farther and farther and farther from the vision of the reign of God. We are trapped in the tragedy of the commons that I talked about last week, where individual decisions in the system are perfectly reasonable for everybody in the system, even defensible. And yet, somehow, poverty goes up and human dignity goes down. So what do we do? What do we do as Christians? This is actually a fundamentally Lenten question, a question for this time of year. How can we avoid both personal sin, and how can we not participate in societal sin, the evil that enslaves us, as we say in our confession of sin, the special confession of sin we're using this Lent? Well, Jesus gives us a clue. Jesus denounced. Jesus resisted. Now, it's very easy for me to say that, standing here in this comfortable room with the powers that be out there somewhere and having this kind of comfortable job that I have. But I do think, even though it's harder to do out there, that we can denounce. We can resist. We can certainly denounce. Perhaps not out on the factory floor right in front of our supervisor, but maybe we do right to our leaders. Ask them to do, our leaders who are gathered in the legislature, the state legislature and the national legislature right now, ask them to do whatever seems to you to be the best way for us to work toward a system that respects the dignity of every human being. And Jean, I did not talk to you about this morning, but I'm going to go ahead and out you. Jean bravely shared her own personal story of her struggles and the things she tries to do under the current system in a plea to our governor and legislatures to expand, to go ahead and accept the federal government's expansion of Medicaid that will help her and a lot of other people. And she shared that. And it was very good. I hope that, I'm sorry to surprise you in the pews with that, but these are the types of things that you can do. And she just shared she was willing to be vulnerable and share her personal story and put a face to the discussion that they were trying to have so that it's not as easy for them to dismiss folks. Particular solutions to the problems that we have. You know, I'm not, after some things in the paper this week about preachers getting up in the pulpit and making political statements, I edited my sermon a little bit. I had a few things that I thought were quite reasonable to say, and then I realized that perhaps, that my point here, the calling here, is for you to decide what you need to do, what you think Christ calls you to do. And we can certainly argue and disagree over particular solutions to our dilemma. Particular solutions we can argue about. Dignity for all, however, is not an option. Dignity for all is a must. Maybe some of us can also resist. I keep looking for an opportunity to get myself arrested in some dramatic fashion. I can say this when my wife isn't here. But we can't always resist like Jesus. This is very true. We can't all go to the cross. We need the jobs we have more than ever. But I wonder if we can't sometimes be a little bit more fox-like. Or more appropriately for our setting, a little bit more like a coyote. Coyotes kind of sneak around. They subvert, they're kind of trickster kind of figures. And we know in Native American cultures they talk about the coyote as kind of a trickster who subverts the system and finds ways to make the right thing happen through tricks and through other changes. And so as I ponder this, I can think of a very simple way to subvert this system. Help each other. 21st century capitalism wants us to believe that it's every person for his or herself. And that if somebody doesn't get rich, it's their own fault, and you don't have to feel bad for them. And it's just protect what you've got and do what you can for yourself. But we know that we are made not just for ourselves. We are made to be in relationship with God and each other. So we can ask ourselves, resisting might be asking, how can we help the unemployed in our community, in St. Stephen's, outside our community? How can we help ourselves? That by itself would be resistance. Can we encourage, for example, more people to go to college? People with college degrees on average earn $15,000 to $20,000 more per year out of college than people who just come out of high school. Over the course of a lifetime, that can translate into hundreds of thousands of more dollars. What can we do as individuals and as St. Stephen's in our community to help more young people understand the importance of college, to help them get into college, and to help them stay in college when money and times are tough? We have several people in our congregation who are trying hard to get through college, and it's tough. It's not just something you say, just go to college. It's tough to do. How can we help them? I'm not saying college is the only solution, or even necessarily the best solution. The truth is, I don't know what the best solution is, and in fact, I think there's a lot of different solutions. I want to hear what you think we ought to be doing. You know this community even better than me at this point. I would love for all of you to spend this Lent talking and praying and thinking about how we can be a community that denounces evil systems and resists those systems by bringing dignity to those who need it. There's no simple answer. We all need to work together, and we need the help of God. One or two things that I am certain of is that Jesus had little patience with people being exploited, with people living lives of desperation and fear without dignity. His whole teaching, his whole life and reason for joining with us was to say, God's reign is with us. God is with us. God yearns for us to lead dignified and full lives. God's reign is here. We just have to see it, grasp it, work with it, because in the end, it cannot be stopped. Jesus would not stop his work, even when it took him to the cross. Herod, I have things to do. I have dignity to bring to people, and I'm going to do it whether you like it or not. And Jesus went to the cross and rose again, and is still working with us as we walk through this life, because Jesus is a living Christ. The social deal that we were promised may be disappearing. But God's deal, a deal of harmony, dignity, mutual love, caring for each other, fellowship, that deal will never disappear. Let us pray for the courage to denounce social evils and the wisdom to know how to do it. Let us pray for the inspiration to know how we are to work for God's reign here and now in this economy, and the wisdom to do it. Let us pray for the strength and the wisdom to serve all those who suffer from the powers that be.